Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Vantage Points. I'm Hisham al-Maligi. My co-host for this year is Davi Barker. Had a blackout. He's in Georgia, so I'm not sure if he's going to be able to join us, depending on his power situation. But tonight's episode is a treat. I have two dear friends and activists and leaders in the Muslim community. I have Professor Yusuf Shuhud and Sister Darakshan Raja. I'm going to bring him in and then we'll introduce them and then we'll talk about the Muslim votes, the numbers, and Muslim issues, especially in this election season. Let me bring him in right now. Welcome, Darakshan and Yusuf. Thank you very much for joining me on Vantage Points.
Happy to be here.
Thank you very much. So, ladies first, Darakshan, please tell us more about yourself. Introduce yourself to those who don't know you. What do you do? Take it away.
Absolutely. So my name is Darakshan. I'm based out of the Washington, D.C. area. I currently am a co-director of an organization called Justice for Muslims Collective. We were founded in October of 2016 in light of really the Trump election. But for us, whether it was going to be Hillary or Trump, we knew that the war on terror apparatus against our communities was going to expand. So we came together, built an organization, been doing it for 4 years. And this year we did a pretty powerful civic engagement campaign. We did a lot of work around Get Out the Count for the census, and we're actually just about to finish up doing calls to 65,000 Arab Muslim South Asian voters in Virginia. So really thrilled to be sharing with you what we also found by talking to our communities, and particularly low propensity voters. I think often a lot of civic engagement campaigns focus on high propensity and mid propensity voters, but we tend to leave out low propensity voters. So excited to share some of the data that we found. And overall, really committed to the collective liberation of our people, and of course, particularly our Muslim communities and Muslim women in particular. So thank you for having me. I'm really excited for this conversation.
Thank you. This is so awesome. Thank you very much. And the Justice for Muslims Collective is a nonpartisan organization, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Okay, Professor Yusuf Shuhud, tell us about yourself, please.
All right, Jazakallah khair. My name is Yusuf Shuhud. I'm an assistant professor at Christopher Newport University. It's my third year at the university, and I also direct the minor in human rights and conflict resolution. And so I'm a bit of I'm neither fish nor fowl when it comes to the discipline. I have interest both in American politics as well as comparative politics. And obviously, with the election season rolling around, I focused a bit more on the former, where my research examines race and ethnic politics, particularly with regards to support for democratic norms and political behavior. And so a couple of the things that were just mentioned were very much catnip to me, right? With low propensity voter data, I just, I perk up whenever I hear that. So yes, I'm actually really looking forward to just sitting back and hearing the conversation between you two, to be honest.
I would love to hear the numbers. I've seen you in action before, and you studied the Muslim community voters in different areas, I believe with ISPU, right?
Yeah, so I sit back and analyze the hard work that folks like Darshan and her organization actually does, right? So I try to do the hard work every once in a while, but certainly I don't make a particular job of it, these real heroes, in my opinion, actually do. But yeah, alhamdulillah, I have had the opportunity. So when I work with social scientific data, it is mostly on the quantitative end, and very often working on data specific to American Muslims, either through ISPU or through my work with the Yaqeen Institute as well.
Excellent. Okay, so let's dive into it. What is if you have a takeaway from this election season regarding the Muslim community, what would that be? Darakshan? I think you're muted.
Oh my God. I don't know if there's one takeaway. I think that there are many, many takeaways. I will say what I have noticed, particularly, I think there's two worlds, right? There's the social media sphere where there's a lot of online engagement from Muslim activists, Muslim organizers, and then there's what is happening on the ground to Muslims who are not necessarily connected to any activism or organizing. And I think the two worlds don't always talk to each other. I think what I can say from both places is that what we don't have right now is we don't have a unified political vision around what Muslim communities want in terms of the political sphere, how to engage in principled and ethical ways that don't throw members of our own communities under the bus, but also other communities. I think the conversations around particularly who has been able to represent us to the Biden campaign or other campaigns and how they have thrown certain segments of our communities under the bus. I think this is a reoccurring challenge of like, there is a dearth of Muslim representation that is rooted in actual community engagement. And also as of right now, we don't really have as Muslim communities some kind of a agenda or political identity or some kind of alignment that we can all come around, coalesce around. It really is when we talk to voters in our communities, like folks have different issues that they care about. For some, it is, tied to foreign policy. For others, it's like literally issues around police brutality, COVID-19, affordable healthcare, housing. So again, it's like, I don't know if we can say there's a single Muslim, single voter, or necessarily that we are there yet as a Muslim communities with some type of a political vision. I think right now we're struggling with that. So that would be my one takeaway.
Thank you. That's a lot to go through. I'm glad that I have you both, because now I turn to Professor Yusuf and ask, what does the data show regarding this schism in the community?
I mean, schism might be too strong a word. I think. I mean, American Muslims are the most diverse religious community in the United States. And depending on your perspective, that can be either a feature or a bug. And I think that in a lot of the instances when we have, these kind of intranacine conflicts and these instances where individuals are, kind of misrepresenting us from within our community, I think that is when, this the bug side of it, kind of gets front and center. But I think there are ways in which to really leverage our diversity as a feature, as an actual strength, and that's going to take some time. I totally agree that there is something of a lack of coherence around what is the political agenda at this point. But I think a cycle or two or maybe three from now, we're going to look back at this time and really see this moment as one that propelled American Muslim political consciousness to one that really began to solidify, began to coalesce around certain issues. And I think more and more what the data is showing is that domestic issues are really taking center stage, and particularly around issues of race and ethnicity. And I think the more that American Muslims begin to think of themselves as aligned with other minorities in America, that is probably the best route through which to actually have a political impact, I think, moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Excellent point. So, Darshan, on this issue of the representation, I read something that you wrote before, that you've been communicating to Muslim voters across different states, and actually you mentioned it earlier as well. Tell us more about that, and if you're getting feedback from those Muslims, what is your experience about?
Yeah, I mean, I will say that our organization is really focused on voters in Virginia because we are a local organization. We're not a national organization. And to be honest, Muslim voters all across the country don't have different issue barriers. All jurisdictions don't look the same. But I think what I will say is in our conversations, I mean, number one, there's a whole conversation we can have about even access to data on Muslim voters and how messy that is and how much noise there is. I mean, there's no real list out there. Unfortunately, probably only the government has a list of Muslims. The surveillance, like honestly, they're the only ones. Any other list that if anybody else tells you we have the list of all Muslim voters in the country, they're lying to you. There's a lot of noise in that data. It's really using things like names and like, you know, former history. So one, there are some challenges around data around our communities, how to get that. But let's say, you know, we were able to identify folks based upon previous voting, but also names, and which again, right, with names, that's a challenge too, because folks can be Muslim and not necessarily have Muslim sounding names. People can also have Muslim sounding names and not be Muslim too. So we can have that. But I'd say what we've found in at least talking to folks in Virginia, Muslim voters, is like, a lot of folks, I mean, you know, their local masjids and so forth, they're kind of their community spaces to go to. In terms of political home, that's not stuff we're really picking up. A lot of folks are also identifying as moderates in our community. But yet it's very interesting in terms of issue areas. So at least in our data, which was with like, you know, a few folks, we did find like Islamophobia and racism was one of the first #1 issues that the community wanted addressed. And also the second was around police accountability and reform. And the third was government surveillance of masjids and Muslim communities. So again, I think from issue areas, like our communities definitely care, they're being impacted. But in terms of, again, representation, I mean, that is still something we're struggling with. There are a lot of organizations, but who is really doing that long-term, like power building, right? Voter education beyond just here is how you go and vote in a safe way. But like, what is it? What does our power to vote actually mean? What does accountability look like of politicians once they come into office? So I think, again, we're getting there, but we still do have a lot of work. And again, around representation, I do think there's different types of representation out there, but I don't know if we can say we have solid representation that exists right now.
Agreed. And I was not, of course, no one is surprised that the majority of Muslims are supporting more the Democrat side, including Biden. I'm not surprised by anything anymore, but it was really kind of surprising to see a gathering of Muslims with Trump signs in a conference to support Trump and making dua. And that's the picture that I saw on social media. So there are Muslims who are supporting Trump for their reasons. And, you know, okay, that's your choice. But now, Professor Yusuf, does this data that we have, which we know is not foolproof, does it show Muslim swing votes in certain areas?
So when you say Muslim swing votes, you mean votes that? So that's the thing. Like, you know, we use this term swing voter in a number of kind of different ways. If you mean it to denote swinging from one side of the ideological spectrum to the other, or one, you know, supporting one party to the other, there really aren't that many swing voters. I mean, what Muslims can contribute in terms of swing, I guess, would be just turning out, right? The community is not a community that turns out in droves. What data we do have, however faulty it is, seems to at least triangulate around that general takeaway, that there's a lot of room for improvement. And so when that improvement, you know, when we do see an uptick, then yeah, you know, the impact of American Muslims becomes that much greater. But that can really only take place in, you know, so many, in just a few kind of primarily localities. If you're
Right.
talking about states, then really it's really only Michigan, and you know, to a far lesser extent maybe Pennsylvania and Florida, right? If you really want to stretch it a little bit,
Mhm.
but it's really on the local level where, you know, Muslims, and that's the thing, you know, I understand the urge to always think nationally, but
Mhm.
the vast majority of politics takes place at the local level, and
Definitely.
to the extent that we try to reorient American Muslim political engagement to that local level more, I think will be far more likely to actually build this sense in the American Muslim community that they are, you know, a voting and engaged community.
Mm. And this is actually a struggle of mine when I'm trying to help elaborate this point that you were just making, which is focus locally, focus on the smaller offices, because that's what affects you more than the presidential election. And I use the example, and I get flack for it, but I posted this video about that for a Muslim voter in New York State, where I am, because of the number of Muslims, even if we vote all of us as one block, it's not going to tip the balance to Biden or Trump. Biden will still win, Trump will still lose.
Mhm.
So why not? And let me add this point: for a party to become an official party with ballot access in New York State, you used to need 50,000 votes for the governor candidate. Okay,
Mhm.
so the last gubernatorial election took place in 2018. Cuomo won his second or third term. I forgot how many, because between him and his father, it's a dynasty. But anyway,
Mhm.
so and the Libertarian Party, for the first time in 49 years or 48 years, received ballot access because the candidate for governor on that line received more than 50,000 votes.
Mhm.
What did Como do? He had a committee that was to study these issues and redesign the system that was ruled by court unconstitutional. So he went behind like a different route. Long story short, right now, instead of 50,000 votes, you need 180,000 votes, and
Mhm.
every 2 years, not every 4 years.
Oh, wow.
So this is the corruption and consolidation of power to the big two that prevents and stifles any like candidate even from going up. And mind you, and I want you to talk, but I'm sorry, let me just add this point.
Mhm.
Most candidates don't even make it to the ballot because they don't collect enough signatures. So we have this issue. So long story short, I want to bring awareness more, and I appreciate that you both agree with this, that local offices are more important. So what is, in your view, the way to do this? Because it seems that we come every 4 years. It's an emergency. It's the most important elections in our lifetime. We
Mhm.
go to vote, and we have no strategy. We have nothing. What do you
Mhm.
think, Direction?
I mean, I think the answer is in what you already mentioned. I think that focusing on that local level, building power is so important. I also think that getting into these cycles of 4 years or 2 years, if we're always on the defensive, if we're always wait last minute, then guess what? We're always going to be right one step behind rather than thinking forward. You know, one thing, again, in my personal capacity, I'll say, I think one thing the right wing has done is that they have this long-term 10, 20-year vision, and they've been organizing and moving in that way. Whereas, you know, the sort of liberal democratic strategy has been always about let's counter and respond to what Republicans put out. You know, one of the things that we learned about was like there are all these rich donors on the right who all they do is just fund people to build, you know, organizations and projects to just go out there and build collectives and like, you know, constantly just resourcing them and outside of election cycles. And I think for us as Muslim communities, because obviously we don't have one community, we have multiple communities and multiple identities within also the Muslim identity, right? Really focusing at the local level and really understanding our leveraging power. So yes, as a broader community, we don't necessarily have numbers on this national scale, but, you know, for example, in Virginia, Northern Virginia, there's a significant size of Muslim communities who do actually influence local elections, state elections, which is why folks are showing up to the masjids trying to court those votes because they know they need that vote. So I think if we understood where we have those blocks and where we can be strategic, then I think we can win. But there's a lot of work to be done at the local level around our shifting our political consciousness, because unfortunately, when we have middle to upper class, certain class of Muslims dictating the political agenda, it sometimes turns off our ally organizations or people who are trying to move towards a collective liberation vision. And we start also silencing people internally who might be more critical of even the Democrats or critical of state violence, for example. So again, I do think that the local level is where we have a lot of power and answer, but we do have a lot of work to do to coalesce again around, and these things are going to take some time.
Excellent. Professor Yusuf, I'm mindful of the time. You had told me you had another commitment, so how long can you stay with us?
I got another 10 minutes or so.
Okay, excellent. So let me ask you this question then. In New York State, I just mentioned that the statewide Muslim vote will not tip the balance for Biden or Trump. But on local offices, especially in New York City, especially in areas like Bay Ridge in Brooklyn, and the Congressional District 11, which includes the area of Bay Ridge and Southwest Brooklyn with Staten Island, where I am residing for the past 21 years, the Muslim vote was crucial in tipping the balance for the current congressman, who's a first-timer running for re-election. And the Muslim vote is crucial and a swing for him to win the re-election. If the Muslim vote doesn't come out strong, then it's going to be hard for him to win. So here's my question now. How do we craft, and I know this might need studies in another episode, but let me just put it there and try to take a stab at it. Craft a coherent, principled list of issues that we cannot compromise on when we are dealing with such candidates, especially when we have the power to tip the balance for them or not. Because as of now, some of the positions of that congressman is not really at all in line with our principles. So what do you think about that?
So, as I do from time to time in my classroom, I'm going to deflect a little bit and answer a question that I would rather answer, which is related to that question, which is that I think that is a problem that's not unique to any community around the country with a meaningful proportion of American Muslims, or any group of American Muslims that is seeking to kind of up their engagement. It's tough defining where those red lines are. Because as the Akshan was pointing out, I mean, we have these multitudes of identities, and a lot of times, the issue that is the red line for one individual or one group of individuals might be, something of a gray area, something that you can compromise on for another group of individuals, and that's something that we have to kind of reckon with. And these squabbles that we see right now, looking at it in the moment, it seems like we're a hot mess, right? But this is just the natural order of things, right? When we're still a very nascent community. I mean, yes, African American Muslims have been here and been the bulk of American Islam for quite a while, and still are a significant portion of American Muslims. But if you look at the data, the vast majority of American Muslims are either first or second generation immigrants. And so first or second generation immigrants who, the majority of them have only been here since, 1980 or beyond. And so this is still a very nascent community. And so I think what we're seeing now is, am I still with you?
Yes, you're on.
Okay. I think what we're seeing now is the growing pains, for lack of a better way of putting it, right? Of a community kind of going through this evolution of escaping this kind of quasi isolationist standing that they had, where they just engaged on this one issue of foreign policy, right? To where now they need to think about a multitude of issues, and that's naturally going to breed a lot more complexity. That's going to take time to kind of sort out and figure out. So that's a very roundabout way of telling you I'm not really sure, and to stay tuned, and that I'll be actually looking to individuals like you two, and seeing what you do, and I think a lot of others are going to take your lead.
Excellent. So let me pose the same question to you, Darshan. How do you see us forming a coherent approach to how do we deal with those candidates?
Oh my God, that's $1 million question. I feel like if I had the answer, we'd be good by now, right?
I had a disclaimer that it might take a study or a couple of episodes.
I think it will take time. That's my first thing. I mean, second is just, I think we need to do mass community engagement. That's one thing I always go back to as, even an organization ourselves, is that we can put all the positions we want if, 3 or 4 people are coming up with it. But if it's not grounded in actually what our local community members are saying, then it's always going to fall short. So really, I feel like at this point, I would love for really Muslim institutions and organizations to do like deep level community engagement to ask these questions. What is your political vision as a Muslim in this country? What does it look like to engage the system? I mean, there's so many Muslims I know right now who hate the fact that they're having to vote for Biden, or they feel forced to, knowing that unfortunately the Democrats have also been Islamophobic against our community. So it feels always like we're stuck in the cycle of choosing the lesser of two evils. But some people are like, you know what, I'm kind of done with that. Give me something else. And so I really would say at this point, I'm really just interested in like, what are political visions our folks have? And to be very transparent, I don't think I will ever come to one, because I do think people have different goals for what it means to be in this country. Some folks have assimilationist perspectives and like that's what they want. Other folks might not work for them. So I also am not waiting for one strategy, to be really honest with you. I think we probably will have multitudes of those. The problem becomes that certain political ideologies get supported because they are in alliance with what the state wants for Muslim, the vision of Muslims in this country politically. And so they then end up getting resourced. And I think that also puts a lot of our community members on the defensive, which is where where the critiques and backlash that you see often comes in. But still, we're kind of missing a space of, well, what do we want? And what does that type of vision look like? So that's just my thoughts.
Right. Thank you. No, that's pretty good. So now the issue of representation. So we have quite a few organizations now that work in this field, PACs, 501c4s, and others. And we've seen the latest issue with Engage and the representation and their connections to some Zionist or anti-Muslim forces. Like, no one can deny that the work that Engage does as far as the political organizing is good work. The problem comes, in my view, and I agree with the critics, that you're allowing a lot of things to go unchallenged by your relationship with such other organizations. So, Yusuf, have you experienced a Muslim organization in that field that could be a good example to copy?
A non-Muslim organization, you mean?
No, a Muslim one.
A Muslim one.
Right.
I mean, there's just not that many. And I think that it kind of just kind of goes back to my point. I think Engage is a perfect example of, we don't have the template quite yet, and it's going to be trial and error, and that's we're in a bit of an error phase. But it's fail 6 times, try 7, right? So this is how it's going to be. And I think we just have to as a community, what we have to do is realize that a lot of these individuals are making really good faith efforts here, right? And their mistakes should be, yes, called out, and they should be held to account, but they should be allowed the space to kind of rectify
Right.
the error if they want to take that opportunity. And I think the best template for what works in kind of a general sense is to allow this phase of trial and error to proceed, where you're progressing along the way, not just stagnating. Right.
Right.
If we keep just staying in the same space, and not kind of broadening and deepening our engagement, not just with politics more generally, but our engagement within our community to raise issues and really engender a more holistic sense of what's at stake and what is it that we're fighting for. Then what's the use, right? I mean, we really need to put in that hard work. And again, I'm not the one on the front lines, so I hate to kind of, right, you all are the ones on the front lines, right? But I think that people, again, need to just simply follow your lead, and hopefully you can lead us to the American promised land.
Thank you. Wouldn't that be nice?
Yeah.
Okay, Professor Yusuf Shahood, thank you so much for joining me on Vantage Points. I look forward to another time when it's less intense in the political season, and looking forward to your education of the community in another time, inshallah. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it was a real pleasure, and I really hope to see. I have to say this. I really hope to see Darshan a lot more. Please, everybody, anyone that has clout in any organization, make sure that she is headlining whatever forum, whatever banquet that you are doing. Make sure she's front and center. She knows her stuff. Honestly, one of the more informed individuals I've ever had the pleasure of listening to on this topic. Does that clear to the both of you?
Second, take care, Habibi. Ma'asalam. Excellent. So I second that very much. I've been following your work for many years, and mashallah, I mean, you should be leading the effort in at least co-leading. So
other leaders out there. But thank you for the love and the support. It means a lot, because we try our best.
Definitely, yes. Thank you. So let me bring in my brother Ghanem Khalil. Assalamu alaikum, Ghanem. I think you're muted. Try to unmute. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Assalamu alaikum to both of you.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I know you've been patiently listening. Thank you for joining me. And introduce yourself. You're a former Marine, and you're a current park ranger. And
yeah, I'm Ghanem.
Tell us more.
My name is Ghanem Khalil. I was born in England, and I came to the United States, came to Brooklyn when I was 11. And my father was a nurse, but he had a hard time assisting us with education. So I joined the military, which was both a good and a bad decision. In the military, I became an imam for the Muslim recruits. I think we had, according to Langley in Virginia, we had the biggest Muslim Jummah services in the military. I don't even know how that's possible. I would think the Army would have, or the Navy, but we had the biggest one. But that came to an abrupt end when over 100 people converted to Islam eventually, and this kind of shocked the Christian chaplains. Most of them were from the South, and they hadn't seen anything like this happen before. So they gave us a little issue. But by that time, my contract ended. I got out, and alhamdulillah, I'm a park ranger now. I love studying and teaching about the natural environment and ecology. But my interests are actually more theological and philosophical than that. I try to add a philosophical dimension to the ecological crisis that the globe is facing. They don't want to hear much of that because they look at it from a Euro American point of view, a materialistic or a reductionist point of view. That's how they see nature. But of course, as Muslims, La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, we see it as a metaphysical, from a metaphysical perspective first, and then from there, more of a materialistic perspective after, within the metaphysical context.
And you're also vice president of the Islamic Civic Association of Staten Island.
That's
with
right.
me. We co-founded. So, mashallah, I remember Ghanem Direction. Let me just tell you a short story about him. I didn't know him until around 2008, 2009, if I remember correctly. And it was through Peace Action, that organization, Peace Action. So we had a chapter in Staten Island, and we wanted to organize some talks and some events to reduce tensions and bring Muslim community up to the normalize basically and have interactions with others. So they told me about what about Ghanem and he's in the Marines and so, whoa, I don't want anybody like that talking about Islam, and I was very careful, because if you remember that time, 2008, 9, 10, it was like Islamophobia was up to the roof. So anyway, I met Ghanem and suspicious in the beginning, and then he became my brother. And now whenever there is an event, I put him to speak and I sit down. So mashallah, he's very, very, very well read, classically educated on Islamic theology, and mashallah, has a lot of good vision on what the Muslim community is going through right now, and the issues of modernism versus the original Islamic message. So Ghanem, let me pose that question to you. How do you see the Muslim community in the current crisis, for lack of a better term, going into this election, and we are 4 days away?
How do I see the Muslim community?
Dealing with it, do you see, for example, issues of Muslim community forgetting their identity, things like that?
I'm also a historian, so I like to study Muslim-Muslim relations, and I study the other minority communities who finally, after several generations, assimilated to a point where they were satisfied with their political activism. And when you look at some of those communities, whether they're Jewish communities or minority Christian communities or just other racial communities, they have to leave a part of their tradition behind in order to integrate and progress. Most of the time that's okay, but when it comes to Muslims, we're seeing people polarized over really minor issues. And then in the middle of that, there's people who are saying, explaining more about what the differences are and how to assimilate correctly. Abdul Hakim Jackson is one of them. He's an African-American Muslim. So he's an American. His parents are American. So he understands what the Muslim community is going through, but from a generational point of view. So he's an example of someone who, has a good perspective on this type of thing, assimilating or integrating without giving up your traditional values and principles. But I do see a lot of the other communities, they're polarized over really minor issues. And it's very difficult for them to make proper decisions. They get really emotional and they conduct themselves un-Islamically when it comes to speaking with each other. So we're supposed to be really kind and gentle with each other and also with non-Muslims. But they can't manage to do that. They're very disrespectful towards each other, and that creates polarization. And then people tend to think they have to take sides. But I would say that if we look at it from an Islamic perspective first, or any type of crisis, but the political crisis and Islamophobia and how we're being treated by multiple parties, not just the Democrats and Republicans, but there are also other parties too, like the Green Party. They don't really see us how we would like for ourselves to be presented from an Islamic point of view. Many of their writers wish that we secularize Islam, and they're getting a little bit more open about it now. But before it was like, we're going to include you, but their main agenda seems to be to secularize Islam or secularize the Muslim population so that they can be integrated into their own agendas. So the left, the right, Democrat, Republican, people in the middle, they would love for this to happen. Unfortunately, we can't really do that. There are certain things you can't compromise. But those are the essentials of Islam, the pillars of Islam. Everything else is a gray area for us, and we need to communicate more effectively with each other to make more to make better decisions, more intelligent decisions when it comes to what our political clout should be, and how what integration means for us, what political activism is for us, and how we can influence the society that we live in.
So let me get back to you, but I want to pose that issue that you raised to Direction. Ghanem put it in a way that I could not. He said, we kind of embed ourselves, secularize ourselves, and become embedded within other agendas. And that's the issue that I'm struggling with, and how to keep our identity, how to keep our principles while working with other agendas, whatever it is, left, right, in the middle. So how do we get to do that? Like, what do you see first? Do you agree with that this is what's happening? And then what do you see one of the solutions could be?
I mean, I think in terms of the piece around assimilation and integration, and that it requires us to get rid of certain parts of ourselves, our Muslim identity, our Islamic identity, I do agree with that. I mean, I think that was going into a little bit earlier what I was mentioning too, of like, when we don't have our own political vision and we don't do it on our terms, then yes, you're going to end up getting, put into someone else's box. And so, I'll leave it there on that part in terms of, we have to be clear on what we want, and the we is going to look, unfortunately, it's going to look different. There's no one, unified Muslim community or Muslim. People are going to have different iterations of it. In terms of how do we, do it? I mean, I think we don't have to agree to something we don't want to be part of, and it's going to come with consequences. But I do believe you get respected more if you stand on your own terms and you say, I'm not going to engage with you unless we are in alignment and agreement on this. And if you don't want this part of me, then we don't need to be part of that space. We have to think about some other spaces that we want to build. So I think there is some little bit about also just, do we want to stand up for ourselves or not? And I think sometimes some Muslims don't do that. They want access to those spaces. They want the clout that comes with those spaces. Again, it's all about, where are you negotiating what you're willing to compromise on, and what are your red lines that you refuse to actually compromise upon? And that's also not always transparent from our institutions. We tend to get the Muslim identity, but really don't know what that means beyond that, or particularly around if they are representing us, what are they willing to compromise on or not? We kind of find out later on if someone exposes it or someone calls it out. But I think sometimes orgs and folks are also not really transparent about what they're doing or what they're compromising on. But yeah, I think at the end of the day, it's up to us whether we're going to agree with it or not, and whether we're going to be part of that space or not.
So do you think it's more organizing on those who are more principled to put the others in check, for example?
I will say that when you do the work of accountability or putting other on checking them, I think that then we leave out the part of who we still want to be. And I think there's a lot of work to be done on, like, what do we actually stand for? And also building an accountability mechanism from the get-go. So not once harm has been done and things have already gotten way out of control, which I think that creates a lot of tension. But like, what does it mean to be accountable from the start of what you're doing? Which is why I think from us as like community organizing groups, for us, it's like, do we have a membership? Do we have a base? What is our structure of accountability? Or is it one or two people who are taking a decision? Or is it being driven by maybe outside forces who are funders or donors? I think that's where we just have to be very transparent from the get-go of like, who is this really for? Who is really driving the agenda? And also, who are you accountable to? We say Muslim communities, but there's millions of Muslims in America. What does that mean? Who? People on social media? Like, what are we talking about?
Right.
I think that's what's really important from the get-go to learn.
So one of the issues that I've struggled with also throughout the time, that some of those who have the access, some of those who appear to be the representatives of the Muslim community, like um, they rose at a time when we had nothing whatsoever. We had no infrastructure. We had no membership. It was basically either an individual effort or money effort. You know, like people with money reached, for example, the mayor of New York donated X amount, and they were appointed and they became friends. Why? Because the mayor knows that next election he needs to go to these people in order to be able to get the money. So this is the issue that we are dealing with. But I guess what I'm trying to get at is, again, we should not wait until 2024 to start talking what are we going to do. You know what I mean? So Ghanem, what do you think about what I just said, and how to address the issue of accountability in a way that doesn't create more harm than good?
Well, we're instructed to find an agreement within between our institutions on what's really important for the Muslim community. So there needs to be a lot of dialogue between the leadership of different institutions and organizations, Muslim ones. There's a lot of scholarship now coming out. I mean, a lot of like articles and blogs and speeches where people are trying to address these types of issues, where they're talking about accountability, who does the accountability, what are we accountable for, and things like that. And I think Islam provides us a proper standard to base those discussions upon. But when it comes to details, I prefer diversity than a monoculture. And the reason why I say that is because the Muslim world has always been diverse. Even if you're living under the same government, it's always been diverse. That diversity cannot be erased. But at least what we can do is build a foundation on what we agree upon is the best, in the best interest of the Muslim community, and that discussion needs to take place between the leaders of the different institutions. That doesn't mean that we can't engage our leaders and provide ideas and perspectives. Like, for example, someone who's an expert in media studies can lend that expertise to someone who wants to express a certain perspective more effectively, so that Muslims and non-Muslims can learn from it and build bridges, basically. So it's not that we just need to go to these institutional leaders. Whatever skills or gifts or degrees people have, they can lend assistance to these leaders and build a network of communication where we can first decide what is the most essential for the Muslim community, and then build from that and talk about other important things about, foreign policy, domestic policy, our legal rights, our civil rights, and things like that, and build from there. That was a very general answer. I answered it very generally because I'm not really familiar with all the particularities of how things are functioning at the moment, and that's because everything's changing, everything's dynamic. So as soon as we pinpoint something, it's changed already.
Right.
So I gave a general response to you.
No, it's still, this is the methodology of the Islamic teachings, how to approach these issues and differences. Direction, do you think social media is kind of a fuel for the, like in the differences and the schisms that we see all around us? Like it seems that people lose their humanity when they're disagreeing on social media. Have you experienced the difference between social media interaction with the same people face to face?
Yeah, I mean, I will say, obviously, the schisms weren't created by social media. I think they've existed pre that too. I think though, but social media does add another dynamic. I think it's very interesting the persona people can take online versus when you meet them in person. They can be very different people, even how they engage and how they talk to you. And so, I think human to human contact is always very important because tone is something that you pick up when you're talking to someone. So when you're writing, sometimes you can get so caught up in trying to be right that, it becomes about a display or a sort of, I always say kind of like a online performance of, I'm right. and also the fact that it's public, the shame aspect also comes in because you're like, people are watching me. So I think the social media piece has contributed to some of that. And also I will say social media has also, created some place for balancing a little bit of power differentials because there are some folks, pre-social media who you just could not get access to, frankly. Right. They would not be in any close to your spheres. They would be totally inaccessible. And, some folks are using social media to make those accountability calls. And I don't know if social media didn't exist, if we would even hear those voices because they would get drowned out completely. So I think, again, social media is a tool. We can use it to build power. We can use it to build community. We can use it to do good things. You can also use it to do terrible things. And so, again, I don't want to blame the tool. I think we have to figure out how we engage. And again, it has real life consequences. I mean, there's so many times where things pop off on social media and like people in real life are experiencing the harms of what has happened online and what they're experiencing. So, yes.
Thank you. So in the remaining few minutes, I want to address issues that are important to different Muslim communities around the United States. And of course, we know that the American presidential election is not only important to American Muslims, it affects all Muslims everywhere in the world due to the American military and foreign policy. So both of you, this is to both of you. Let's each of you pick one area and let's discuss it. So Ghanem, what is an issue for you and important this election cycle?
There's so many issues.
Sure, that's why we have only like about 8 minutes.
I'll just randomly pick one. War and foreign policy, because I was in the military, and that's a very sensitive issue for me. War and foreign policy.
Right.
So that's a very sensitive issue for me. But what I do is I look at the Democrats and I look at the Republicans and I see what their policies are. So they write a lot of stuff for these think tanks. Their advisors write a lot of stuff for these think tanks. And if you're not familiar with what they're writing, you probably won't be able to make a proper judgment of what kind of policies they're thinking about. Not necessarily what they're going to enact, but what they're thinking about. But what they're thinking about is very important to understand. I think both parties represent a very dangerous foreign policy when it comes towards Muslims. I don't think that many of the people who make those policies have any gumption about human life in general. But when it comes to Muslim life is very cheap. Yes, they're very cozy with the dictators and authoritarians, but those are for economic, political leverage reasons. But they support wars which devastate millions, tens of millions, in some cases hundreds of millions of Muslims. And for me, that outweighs a lot of the other issues because we're talking about lives and you're talking about people we don't see suffering. Here in the United States, when something happens, it's all over. But people getting drone bombed right now as we speak, no news, no nothing. Right. Kids getting drone bombed, no news about it. But that matters to me a lot. What I do in opposition to that matters to me because I always look at it from a day of judgment point of view. When I'm standing on the day of judgment, if I'm asked, what did I do to counter these things, and I have no answer, that's a terrible thing to think about.
Right. And you objected to the Iraq war when it happened. Can you tell us this story briefly?
No, really briefly. Yeah. What happened was I switched over from the Marines to National Guard thinking that I wouldn't be deployed. And then my unit was a supply unit. They were going to be deployed. And so what I did was I took the preemptive step of letting my chain of command know that I'm not going to deploy. And at that point, I've already been an activist. And at that point, I'd done a lot of research in the Marines about U.S. foreign policy. And there are many Marines who are retired who write against that foreign policy. So I didn't have any qualms about telling my supervisors or anyone, I don't care who they were, that I wasn't going to deploy. You can try to deploy me. I'll clean the toilets in the jails. I much prefer that than being deployed with you to do an unjust action. So I went public. I ended up on Fox News. The guy tried to shame me. He attempted to shame me. Greg Jarrett, never forget his name. I hope I meet him in the street someday. For a discussion, I'm not violent. But I spoke out. I was in the press. I thought I was going to jail. I was getting ready to go to jail, but I was happy about it. But then my unit never deployed, and I got discharged, and everything. I say Allah protected me. My mom was making dua for me. The dua of the mother is very powerful. So whatever the case, that's the history when it comes to that. And I've been an activist, anti-war activist ever since.
And you spoke at a press conference professing your position before the discharge?
Yeah, I spoke at a press conference, very well covered. All the major press was there. And then from that, I got invited to Fox News. They saw it and they invited me to Fox News.
Right. Well, that's one that I can say thank you for your service. So, Direction, let's go back to the issue of the what issues are key for this election cycle. What do you see Muslims should be the thermometer for their choice for vote?
Oh, that's such a hard question. I think there's so
That's what I do, Direction.
No, it's hard. I definitely agree around the issues around war and drones and all of that. I think to me, that war on terror expansion is definitely something I've been thinking a lot about. And because even in the backdrop of the pandemic, it feels like definitely they're still moving forward with war abroad, but also that war coming right back home, and then the sort of interaction between the local and the global. So that really what worries me. I would say for me, the pandemic, though, is really at the forefront of everything around COVID-19. And particularly the impact of COVID-19 on Black and brown communities, Muslim communities who were excluded. Islamophobia ends up intersecting in all these other systems. And so it makes it harder for our folks to seek key services they're being excluded from. And so I am really worried about the impact of this pandemic on Muslims here, Muslims abroad, but it feels like just because politicians are over it doesn't mean that the pandemic is over, and the impacts of this are going to be long-term that we're going to see. And so I do worry about that a lot. And to me, that is one of the biggest issues of what are their responses. And obviously neither party has really good responses to the pandemic right now.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I doubt that if Hillary was the president, it would have been much different after everything is said and done on the ground. Rhetoric, of course, we're dealing with an idiot, basically. There is no other way to describe him. But after everything is said and done, it is not just the president. There are so many institutions in the country that basically did not do a job. So I understand. So both of you hopefully are joining us on the election night coverage. I'm going to be on from 8 p.m. Eastern until I fall asleep right on camera. But hopefully not before midnight. So when California polls officially close, even though I know that we're not going to get the result that night because of all the mail ballots and whatnot, but still, I'm doing this new. I started in Ramadan in beta mode, and hopefully we can pick up. And basically, I just want to explain again. I'm using this show as a platform for the Muslim community to discuss our own issues by ourselves instead of being sound-bited on others' shows or stereotyped. So I think we've done a good job in delineating some issues tonight, and looking forward to more of that. I appreciate you both coming on the show. Thank you, Direction. Thank you, Ghanem. And thank you, of course, Professor Yusuf Shuhud. Ladies and gentlemen, there are hashtags and there is a hashtag. This is the hashtag. Take care, America.
Thank you.